and to discuss blended distribution and how companies are staying in control. Please welcome Lou Harasymiw from IHG, Ben Mussler from Sabre, Peggy Studer from RoomIT by CWT, Nadine Pagel from Kimpton Hotels, and Clive Word from OTA Insights.
Thank you, Ian. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning in the distribution track. Hopefully, you're actually interested based on some of the comments that Jan made and Inder discussed about what we're going to talk through. Specifically, we're talking about blended distribution. So you're probably aware of the fact that there's a lot of changes going on within the industry, that the way that hotels are selling rooms are not the way that they used to. We're seeing OTA rates on the GDSs. We're seeing a lot of different ways in leisure and business. So I'm not going to really define it any further than that. I'd like to kind of leave that up to the panelists. So why don't I turn it over to them to introduce themselves? And because blended distribution is a little bit different and it's adding changes and potentially some friction and some scariness to the world, I'd like to actually let our panelists introduce themselves and provide kind of a scary or interesting or unique travel experience that they've had in their lives to kind of get us into the conversation.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Nadine Pagel. I'm Senior Director of Distribution and Voice for Kimpton Hotels. And I guess my most recent sort of change or difference in the way I travel is I have a 10-month-old. And when he was 3 months, we decided to take him on his first sort of long flight from LA to Boston. And he had a meltdown in the boarding area. And it was a little frustrating because my husband and I tried everything we could to settle him down, and nothing was working. And we haven't even boarded yet, so I was worried about how the rest of the flight would go. And meanwhile, I'm sweating in the boarding area and getting side eye from other passengers, and it was a big change and pretty frustrating for me. But I think the good news is that once the flight took off, he pretty much slept the entire time, so it worked out in the end.
Excellent. So you made it here. You didn't get kicked off the plane, and that's the important thing.
My name's Ben Mussler. I'm the Director of Global Lodging for Sabre Travel Network. My team focuses on our relationships with hoteliers distributing in the GDS, and also we work with our GDS media resellers. So my travel story, I was thinking about this, isn't so much about me, but it's how somebody else was having a really bad day, and it turned out to help me. So I was on an international flight to London, and there had been several announcements about the Wi-Fi not working, and they're just having technical issues. Well, I didn't really realize it was related, but there was a man across the way on the other aisle, and he had had several flight attendants come up. He was very upset about something. I thought he might be having a medical emergency, and so he just kept going on and on and on. Well, an hour into the flight, I asked the flight attendant if the Wi-Fi was working again, because I wasn't going to truck out my computer if it wasn't. And she just almost broke down in tears, and she said, "I am so sorry, sir. We can't fix the Wi-Fi. We think it's going to get fixed, but it just keeps not working. I'm so sorry." And she was really having just a terrible time with it. And I made a joke about, really Wi-Fi on an international flight in business class is sort of a first world problem. And she laughed and left. And about an hour later, she came back and offered me like 25,000 frequent flyer points.
That's awesome.
And just said, thank you for just being human and kind about this situation. So that was it.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Peggy Studer. I lead the global marketing organization for RoomIT by CWT, which is CWT's recent and new hotel business unit. It was created 2 years ago. I'm based in Chicago. So my travel experience, touch wood, in all the 20 years of extensive travel I've done for leisure and business, I've been blessed that besides the delays that we've all experienced, I've been okay. I did have, for me, the most striking one is a number of years ago, I was on a long travel streak to go to Dubai. From Dubai, I was going to Barcelona, and from Barcelona, I was going to New York, and that was going to take me 3 weeks. And the suitcase got lost on the first leg, and it kept following me. It got, in the new destination 2 days after I arrived every time I left. And so I got a new whole wardrobe out of it. 3 weeks later, the suitcase got back into Paris. So that's for me.
Hi, my name is Clive Wood. I'm General Commercial Manager for OTA Inside, for the Parity Inside product. I've got a history in wholesale connectivity and distribution. So my recent travel experience, I was on a plane to the UK, and I was delayed for almost 4 hours. But I'm not ashamed to say, it was actually the worst delay I've experienced, but I'm not ashamed to say that I enjoyed every second of it. Fortunately, it was Derby Day for the English Premier League. It was Tottenham Arsenal and Liverpool and Everton. And having a young family at home, I don't get to watch much football. And I literally enjoyed every minute of a 4-hour delay waiting to take off to go home. So,
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. And I guess since I put you through that, I should probably introduce myself and share my own story. So my name is Harasymiw. I am the Director of Distribution Strategy Connectivity at IHG. So my story is a little bit different. I was actually in China doing a domestic flight from Shanghai to Beijing. And before getting on the plane, I don't know if you guys have ever flown that. It's a little bit crazy getting on the plane and in the plane and then off. So when I basically said, okay, I'm not going to bother trying to fight through people to get to the bathroom on the plane, and decided to do what I needed to do prior. So go out, wash my hands as you're supposed to do, and come to find a live crab in the sink. So, I don't know what's going, through my head at the time. I mean, I'm trying to think back because it was obviously a complete shock. Is it somebody's pet that they left behind? Is it somebody's dinner that they're going to have on the plane? So really what I did is, kind of from Inder's point is, what do you do? Social media, right? So that was, kind of looking at it and saying, that's just absolutely odd. So anyway, there's my story. Hope you guys appreciate it, kind of what all of us have gone through. And let's kind of get started into the blended distribution. So as I mentioned, kind of at a high level, things are changing within the industry of distribution. There's a lot more changes in terms of how industry or how rooms are being sold, and you can't really tell anymore what's what or who the actual supplier is or who the source of the business is. So why don't I turn it over to the experts here to kind of provide their perspective on it and, thoughts on good, bad, is that the direction we should go? Go ahead, Nadine.
Sure, yeah. So as Lou sort of mentioned, blended distribution's not new, but it has changed significantly. And I think as such, hoteliers have come to expect it and discuss distribution strategy around it. And also use it when negotiating agreement terms. I think 3 important things to consider when working in a blended distribution landscape are cost of acquisition, rate parity, and the customer experience.
I sort of see blended distribution as a natural evolution of consumer behavior. Because the smartphone exists, there isn't really anything as a uneducated consumer anymore. And I think about in my own life how I comparison shop and go to Google and go to Amazon and go to the website of Target or Walmart and look everywhere before I make a purchase. And I see that happening in business travel as well, which is a large part of the GDS hospitality business. And what our agencies and partners have been telling us is that the consumer really wants to be able to see what is included, not included, why there's this really, really low rate on some website somewhere, and why the corporate rate is so much higher. So really the opportunity there, I think, for distribution partners is to work with hoteliers to ensure that we're articulating the value of those different offerings, because most of the time, the corporate rate is actually a better value for that traveler.
Thank you, Ben. So, I kind of agree with what you're saying, being on the distribution side and specifically in business travel. Business travel's been slow to pick up on some of the leisure trends, but they're the same travelers, right? The leisure traveler is the business traveler is the leisure traveler, so they shop around. And we saw a study last year that said 73% of business travelers find that their biggest challenge is to actually find the accommodation they want in the location that they want. So until they can actually find that, they will continue to shop around, and blended distribution will continue to exist, really.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, you can certainly look at it as a loss of control. So there are really three important areas that I would say suppliers or hotel companies need to focus on, and one is robust contracts. It's really important that your legal and your legal counsel actually understand distribution, understand like some of the intermediaries, how they distribute, in order to have recourse in contracts if things get out of control. Two, a selective distribution strategy or a consolidated approach is something certainly to consider. And then the third piece is monitoring. So, whether you have a consolidated approach or you look at mass distribution, you need to be looking at the channels and making sure that you understand what their distribution model is, and that you're monitoring them on a daily basis.
Thanks, Clive. So actually, let me kind of take that to the next step. You have to obviously monitor and keep an eye on some of the data and make sure that you figure out where it's all coming from. So if you have those multiple sources of data, it's really obviously a challenge for suppliers to determine where it's coming from, and obviously to work around the best rate guarantee. So what are your thoughts about trying to manage parity as a result of the blend distribution?
It's not easy. Yeah, I talked about understanding the distribution model, and a blended distribution is every day there's a company that pops up and they're doing something different. There's opportunity is there, and typically the opportunity is they're creating value by price differentiation. So it's ever changing, and I think one just needs to be on top and just have a benchmark and an understanding of what their distribution looks like today, so that when they're looking at strategies or implementing new strategies or looking at what their existing work does to combat disparity or what have you, that they have a benchmark and that they can look to improve, change things, and see if there's an improvement.
I mean, is there a hope for a tool or something that can assist the suppliers to really get to the end of that?
There are a number of companies that have one, including ours. So, yeah, there's definitely applications out there and software out there that you can use to manage, the multiple channels that are out there and get a fantastic insight to what's going on. So, yeah, if you're not doing that already and you think that the state of your parity is good, and perhaps your perspective on it is based on the issues that are brought to you by some of your distribution partners. So, if the major OTAs are coming to you and flagging issues, and the volume or frequency from your perspective is not that high, and therefore you think you have a relatively good state of parity, then if you were really to look into it and shop extensively across all of the channels, you'd probably be pretty surprised as to what your parity looks like.
Thank you. Peggy, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, as long as the commercials are going to be different, the rates you're offering, how you actually display them, what's included is going to be different according to different booking channels. It'll be a challenge for hotel suppliers to continue to monitor that and really gain control of it. From a TMC perspective, we look at what travel managers want. Ultimately, if you look at what their 2019 priorities is to reduce costs, to increase compliance, and look at traveler satisfaction. And until everything is consistent across the board, it's going to be very difficult for a TMC or any distribution company, for that matter, to step away from this model.
I just think what GDSs and distribution partners owe the hotel partners is better reporting, better data on this. So, if additional supply sources are brought into the channel, what we've been working with our customers and advisory boards on is what kind of data can we show them in terms of what did the customer ask for, what was returned, and then what was actually chosen. That sort of shopping behavior in the GDS at least from my perspective, has been lacking. And there's a real opportunity here, I believe, that to provide that reporting and then actually give hoteliers the insights, like Clive was talking, they need to be able to see where rate parity and things are not right.
I mean, I think that certainly makes a lot of sense in terms of having the data available to the hoteliers, but I think there's certainly the challenge is the analytics and trying to figure out, okay, what does this all mean? And I think in a lot of cases, I certainly get bombarded with a lot of data, and it's really a challenge to figure out, okay, what does all this data mean? What do I chase down? And I think, potentially that there is an opportunity for a new person on the staff to kind of look at all that and try to figure out, or maybe expand the scope of what we're doing with rate parity. Any other thoughts?
Yeah,
Nadine?
agreed. I mean, I think rate shopping and auditing, well, tedious, there's a lot of data and resources that we can use for that. It's important to stay on top of it for hoteliers and for our partners as well. With data coming from so many different directions, we find often partners can't pinpoint exactly where a rate issue is stemming from. So the importance of shopping and test booking is there.
Great. Did you have something? Peggy?
Yeah, I was just going to add on top of that, from a TMC perspective, for obvious reasons, we can't give, client level data or travel level data, but we can certainly help all our suppliers work, at an aggregate level and look at what this, what a TMC or distribution company as an overall value can provide to the hotel.
Okay, great. So one thought actually from me just managing the connectivity IHG is really the efficiency of all this, right? At the end of the day, we're looking at not just the GDSs getting availability, not just the OTAs getting availability, not just the wholesalers getting availability, but every one of them pulling availability from us and then feeding everybody else. So really, it's not just one individual hubs that we have to supply now, or individual people we have to supply. Now they're turning into hubs that we have to fund them, or feed them as well. So from that perspective, I think as a hotelier, it's a bit of a challenge that we have to work through. So anyone have any thoughts on how we can kind of deal with that, or is that something that we have to, live with?
Well, the GDS obviously processes a lot of transactions. The last time I checked, we were doing 10,000 shopping requests for air every second and returning 200 itineraries each. So it's 2 million itineraries per second. And I know this is not an airline conference, but I use that just to illustrate the type of volumes that we've had to process and keep up with. And I think in the short term, really, we're going to have to deal with it. I would hope that every CTO at the hoteliers is thinking through how to be able to just continue on. I don't see any silver bullet right now. There are opportunities with cash and other things that we can certainly partner with folks on. I think the longer term will be perhaps a different way of shopping for a hotel product, hopefully not just solely focused on price, and then we may see some relief or different paths in which the customers are looking for a hotel room.
Yeah, just add to that, just from a technology standpoint, I think, it's very difficult to build infrastructure for the eventualities. The state of blended distribution that we have today, when you don't necessarily understand what's going on and how blended distribution actually, how it looks like from a technology standpoint in terms of the volumes and the frequency and why are there these demands at certain times coming from certain suppliers, and I think companies are addressing it retroactively because they're seeing behavior and then they're having to kind of deal with that behavior, and it could be from, for example, the meta search. You've got multiple OTAs returning that don't have direct relationships with hotel chains or hotels. They're returning inventory. If these guys are buying from wholesalers, then that one wholesaler, that one OTA is going to multiple wholesalers for the same room, for the same hotel on the same day. And so you've then got multiple wholesalers all hitting the supply for exactly the same end request. And you don't necessarily have infrastructure that's built to carry that and built with that in mind. But that's that's what plays out in blended distribution. So it's a challenge, I think, from that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that we have to start considering. I mean, there's been, especially as this thing starts rolling out, that potentially could add, as we talked about, some of the parity issues, as Jan and Inder mentioned, that there may be some, we're not looking at a real-time situation anymore because there could be caching in place. There could, essentially, I mean, from our side, we look at a caching solution to try to shorten some of that and make sure that it's not really killing us in our inventory, but then that it is kind of has an issue down the road. And really I think this is one of the challenges from a distribution standpoint, potentially from the HEDNA work groups, is to look into this to kind of find a solution, is really to figure out how we're going to deal with this, because we don't move fast, as kind of we talked about. And I think it's almost maybe this will be the opportunity to really push us in that direction that we need to go. So I do have one last question that I'll pose to you, but I'm gonna, there's actually some interesting ones that have come in place that I'm gonna kind of, let's go through them. From that perspective, if you guys want to ask any questions, it's in the app, so go into the session itself. There's a section where you can go in and add your questions if you want to ask anything from anyone on the team here. And then you have the ability to upvote. So what we do is we look at everything from the top and then kind of down the list. So the first is, what are the best practices for identifying where the parity violations actually are coming from? Is there a better way than booking them? Because I know from our side, that's what we do, is we basically find some issues, then we go in and try to book the reservation and figure out, okay, the source of kind of that booking comes from X. Any thoughts on, is that the best approach, or is there something else that we want to look into?
I can talk to that. I think, unfortunately, it is the hard and fast approach. It's the best approach. There are some other means. One can scrape a website and pick up certain detail in the script that can point to root cause, but it's not always possible via that method. So, currently booking is pretty much the only way to get to root cause, at least consistently and at volume, to really get a perspective on what's going on.
Anyone else have any thoughts? Okay. I guess a question to kind of extend off that is this something that potentially we can get more information from the GDS? I mean, is this an opportunity for you guys to provide that additional feedback to help us kind of get to where we need to find the information?
Yeah, I definitely think that, like I said before, is an opportunity for the GDS, especially if we're able to look at different distribution outlets and what was returned and things.
Yeah, and similarly to you in the GDS, distribution companies, we aggregate multiple sources. So, with some limitations, we are able to track and compare what's being shopped and what's being booked and what's been available at the time of booking. So, working with your distribution companies again, it can be helpful.
Thank you. Okay, so next question. You talk of this being a natural evolution and having to work around it in negotiations. Can you elaborate a bit? How and what did you have to change to stay in control of your strategy? I don't know if Nadine probably come from you.
So I think, as Clive sort of mentioned, in terms of like an agreement negotiation, I think it's important to discuss with the legal team that's familiar in the distribution landscape. And rate parity is really where, as Peggy sort of mentioned, leveling the playing field and making sure that you are upholding rate parity and you're holding your partners accountable to the same.
Next, does the group think that the various GDS, TMC consortia booking tools will go down the path of meta, i.e. pay to play? That's actually a great question.
Do you want to? Well, I know for the GDS, we operate a marketplace, and similarly, you don't pay for an app to use Amazon. You pay for the products when you buy it. So we have, monetary fees in place that we all know of, And so I personally don't think in my world, in the GDS, that we would go down that path. I think what we're trying to do is ensure that travel buyers have the information and the sources they want to be able to pick the right product for that trip.
From a corporate travel perspective, we have to remember that we're here to serve the client. That's the travel manager. He sets his policies. He sets his hotel program. We're there to support it. There is, the tail end of the content where they don't have agreements, where they don't have all of that, where, of course, our commercial agreements with all the hotel suppliers will come into play. But, foremost, it is the travel manager and making sure that whatever we provide and we surface is relevant to the traveler so that he doesn't go outside of that channel to book.
I guess I can see the opportunity of doing that. I remember certainly on the meta side, or when TripAdvisor, Google went into the market there, that maybe that wasn't intent, but I can certainly see a money opportunity. Even if you guys aren't saying it, I think it's certainly something that may be a consideration from either side. We're still talking about monitoring and looking at dates. Why are more companies not following what Marriott has done and what Booking has done? Thoughts on that?
I'm not sure what they've done specifically, so it's difficult to to talk to that. But
all right, well, I'm not aware either, so I apologize for that.
they've done a lot of good stuff. But
yeah. Yeah, so I guess it's working well for them, and we'll have to have that conversation later. You'll track down your favorite Marriott and Booking.com person to kind of provide the insights. All right, so how does a group think about incrementality? Are channels just shifting between each other, or is there actual demand growth?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think we do see a lot of channels shifting between each other. It depends, on market in terms of growth, but with the blended distribution landscape, and I think there was a question earlier about, when a group reservations booking through an OTA, I definitely think that there is some channel shift there.
yeah, I think that's a big question. If we knew the answer to that, then I think people would make a lot of they'd make a lot of bold decisions. So I think it depends. I think a hotel or a hotel group they've got to try it. They've got to do some A/B testing. They've got to look at a selective, consolidated approach, and they've got to see if it affects the bottom line, which of course can present some financial risk, but I think that's really the only way. There's got to be some faith and some belief of what goes on and what transpires out there in the marketplace, and some bold decisions need to be made, I think.
Well, the challenge is also there is how do you determine incrementality, right? I mean, there could be multiple different ways of looking at it. If one channel goes down and the other one goes up, then likely there is a correlation between the two. But is that really is it really incrementality or something else? So I think, again, back to the data points, we can get a lot of data, but I think we really need the experience to build up and have that understanding of exactly what that is, and is it a shift or not. So here are a couple questions or a question for Peggy and Benjamin. Are any companies more in control than others?
Well, not to name specific names, but I guess if we're defining control as in they're putting the product where they want the product to go, it would be the lower cost hotels, in my opinion. The ones that have much simpler rate structures, just not as many options. When you have a full service hotel and you can add, breakfast and other attributes, but we're only being able to shop right now by price, it causes issues, and I think there's more leakage. And I don't know if we're going to get to it, but that's what I think the future is attribute-based pricing. And I think there's a huge opportunity, an exciting opportunity for hoteliers to really have customers pay for the things they value in the hotel stay.
So just to kind of extend what you're saying there, do you see a difference in terms of the type of hotel that may be more impacted by blended distribution, right? So you're saying a simplified hotel may have a different perspective than somebody who's on the luxury scale, that, there's additional room types or there's additional, rates that are sold. Do you see an impact on who is going to be potentially bothered by this more?
I certainly think so. When you see a swing of a room that, I think you were saying you were looking at a room that was 200 something, and then if you were outside of the conference window, it was 700 a night. Those type of hotels that make that 700 every once in a while certainly have some more thinking to do in their revenue management department.
Thank you. Peggy, any thoughts?
Not particularly, I'll be honest. I think I agree with you. It's definitely the economy sector that seems to have the biggest handle on the control. Having said that, I think they're probably also limiting themselves in terms of distribution capabilities. So it's striking that right balance between control and capturing that extra demand that right now you may not know where it's coming from.
Thank you. So one last question from the audience, and then I have a kind of a follow-up for everybody. So where do you see the future of dynamic pricing? So dynamic versus static, in terms of how we're selling some of our rooms. What are the obstacles, and what do you think is the appetite from customers?
Is this referring to static?
Well, yeah,
sort
so,
of
yeah,
fixed
essentially, I
prices
think
versus
right.
dynamic.
So, do we look at stat? I mean, so certainly there's been a lot of changes within the industry, and kind of from the hotelier side, a desire to move off of a static implementation, right? So instead of the sales managers running around and having flat rates throughout the course of the year, look at a rate that is, based off of BFR or bar, whatever. So the question is, do we see that, the impact of this, and how is that going to, play with, static rates versus dynamic rates going in through this dynamic model?
Yeah, I mean, I don't personally, I don't see there as really being any obstacles. I mean, the obstacles that is resistance, basically. Assuming that the hotels want to move forward, everyone is working on dynamic rates. The OTAs are working on dynamic rates. GDS is dynamic. There's really no excuse not to move an element of the market towards dynamic. And yeah, any resistance any obstacles are just pure resistance and a lack of will, from my perspective.
Any other thoughts?
The only thing I would add, and I hope I'm understanding the question right, is I think where it sort of falls down is in, with the traditional connectivity of a GDS, in our ability to sort of qualify the shop. So the hotelier could send back more customized pricing or inclusions or something. So that's certainly an opportunity that we're looking at that I believe would help that in that particular model, especially if they're a loyal guest or something like that.
Thank you. Nadine?
I agreed with what's been said. I think there is an appetite to move forward, and obstacles relatively limited. I would say when moving towards dynamic, just make sure to continue to actively manage the channel. It's not a set and forget.
And from the corporate travel side perspective, again, travel managers are, not only re-looking at how they source their corporate programs. I mean, long, big corporate programs are, I don't want to say over, but they're really being looked at very consciously in terms of what's the cost to actually source them versus using dynamic rates available where the volumes aren't there. So dynamic pricing, absolutely, it's there to stay. I think the technology available to support it in all the distribution channels will just continue to increase. So yeah, definitely the future.
Thank you, Peggy. So we only have just under 2 minutes, so I just want to get some closing thoughts from you guys on blended distribution. Where is this going? Do we see this continuing? Do we see this collapsing for some of the challenges that we discussed? Clive, do you want to get started?
Yeah, I definitely see that it's here to stay and here to challenge us for into the medium term. I think long term, there's definitely an opportunity to control, be more control, even in a kind of more blended environment. And yeah, just looking at a distribution strategy, whether it be a mass distribution strategy, a selective or an exclusive strategy, you've got to monitor and you've got to understand those parties that you select in those strategies, you've got to understand what they do. You know, there's no point having a selective strategy if one of your selected partners has a mass distribution strategy, right? And that tends to be what plays out, and you know, it just creates the blend.
I take blended distribution one step further. I mean, we talked about it briefly earlier on, but alternative accommodation is also going to be more and more entering into the mix. Large corporate chains or clients, are looking at it cautiously right now, but it's going to come from the bottom with the smaller corporates, more and more interested in this sort of accommodation. There's a lot of talk, there's a lot of words about it. It's not completely here yet, but I think blended distribution, will incorporate that.
Thank you.
I mentioned it earlier, but I think this will continue for a while, and then the CRS systems and the distribution partners will get robust enough to be able to offer attribute-based pricing, and I think that is an opportunity to completely blow traditional revenue management up, and for a good reason, and really start to extract the value again back out of a full-service hotel and that sort of thing.
And Nadine, last thought?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely think the complexity will continue. As hoteliers, we want to be everywhere our customers choose to transact, and we want to be there with great content that drives conversion, and blended distribution muddies that. So again, just the importance of maintaining rate parity and holding your partners accountable to do the same.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for being here.